Hello, everyone. I'm going to give other people another moment to join, and thank you for joining me today. So, can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. So we are going to get started today, and thank you for joining me. I am Mickey Feldman Simon. I am the founder of I'm Back at Work, and before we get started, I just want to make sure that you know how to use the webinar panel and that it's not obstructing the view of the presentation. So your webinar panel may look like the image here on the right where it is closed up, or the image on the left where it is expanded. And to open and close it, please click on this orange arrow right here, and it will open and close the panel. If the webinar panel is obstructing the PowerPoint now, you can also just click at the top and drag it out of the way so it's not obstructing the view of the webinar. In the last 5 minutes of the presentation, I'll answer any questions that you may have. So please click on this gray bar here that says questions. Type in your questions in the blue rectangle right underneath here, and I will address all of your questions at the end of the webinar. About me. So I am the founder of I'm Back at Work. I have over 25 years experience in HR, recruiting, business development, and marketing. I've taken multiple career breaks throughout my career to take care of my children when they were young, to move continents multiple times, to take care of my elderly parents. And I've returned to the workforce successfully after each one of those breaks. And I decided to found I'm Back at Work to help other women do the same. It saddened me to see many women around me struggle with that process. And through I'm Back at Work, I coach women, I speak, and we have these free webinars to help all women get back, regain their confidence, and get back to the workforce. I also consult to a few Boston startups where I help them with their recruiting and HR needs. I have a BA in psychology and educational counseling, an MSc in organizational behavior, and the SPHR certificate. And before we get started, I'm going to turn off the video camera so you can concentrate on the presentation. So, today we're going to talk about recruiting for small and large organizations and what are the similarities and the differences between them. And the general process is a job description is posted, there is an application process, the resumes are screened, there's some sort of initial phone screening, it usually is a phone screen, the initial screen. There are interviews, there is nowadays often a test or an assignment, and then an offer is presented. What are the differences then? In large corporations, the recs or the open positions are usually created by a team. It's usually a combination of the hiring manager and people in HR or in recruitment. And the description is more specific, and it's designed to meet a certain band or grade level. These bands or grade levels are a way for large organizations to basically categorize different positions combine them together into certain categories where there's a budget set for those roles. So for a certain band or level, they may have a range that they will pay, let's say, between $80,000 and $120,000. And the job description that will be posted is to fit one of those bands. And this is important for you to understand in what flexibility the large organization may have when they're looking at what people to hire. Some large organizations can only hire people who meet that specific band. Sometimes they have a little flexibility where they can hire somebody one level up or one level down, but there is some sort of restriction there to what fits within that description and that level. Large corporations will always post a position on their website. Sometimes even really large corporations will only post it on their website with the thought that they get enough traffic and people looking and interested in their site, and that will be sufficient. So if you have a company that you've targeted that you're interested in, I highly recommend that you check their website on a regular basis. They often post on multiple recruiting sites as well, and sometimes if they have the budget, the more the merrier, with the assumption that the more candidates that you get, the bigger the pool, the higher the chances of finding the right people. Small corporations, usually the job description is a little wider. They don't have that restriction of the pay band or grade level. And I've often heard in startups, the CEOs say, look, I want somebody to run product management. I'm not sure if they're a director, if they're a VP. The people will come, will start interviewing, will work it out. So they can be less specific, the job descriptions. What it also means is don't be shy to apply if you don't meet all the criteria or you exceed the criteria, because there may be some more wiggle room as to what they're looking for. They usually have some sort of a budget in mind in small corporations, but again, it's less restricted by the bands, the internal structure. It may be more restricted by what funds do they actually have. Not all small startups have a career page on their website, so they may not post it there. Of course, if they do, then they will. And they also often use, and more often than not, recruiting sites, but they may not use multiple recruiting sites just because of budget restrictions. So the next step is the application process. In large corporations, they often have an ATS, an automatic tracking system, and you'll be directed to this system. And this system is basically like a database that helps the large organizations track and screen and have and basically manage all the applications. You may need to create an account then on their ATS while you're applying for the position, and you may need to answer some additional questions, and this could be around gender, qualifications, especially if they have affirmative actions that they are trying to meet. And if you are a woman or minority, I definitely recommend that you answer those questions, because that can give you a hands up in certain situations, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. You also may be required to submit additional information, and that can be on other recruiting sites, and that's the same for small corporations, where you probably see today a lot of web recruiting sites like Indeed offer free services for the companies, for the organizations, where they can ask you to submit. It can be an audio interview, sometimes it's a video interview where they have set questions that they want you to answer. Sometimes there's also a quick Excel test, different things like that. So you have to present things other than just your resume. Small corporations usually do not have an ATS. You email your resume in hopefully with a cover letter. And this is where I also suggest keep in mind that since it is less organized, emailing, following up again a week later, saying I'm following up on my application from last week is a very positive thing, because imagine that your resume just went maybe even just to their inbox, not even a file, and it could have easily gotten lost. So it's definitely to your advantage to follow up and reach out to them again. How does the resume screening work? In large corporations, they often have the ATS that even if they use the ATS, it may or may not do the tracking and the screening for them. So the screening when it's automated, basically a computer will read over the resumes and look for keywords in your resume. It can be keywords, it can be a certain skill they're looking for, certain skills. And here it's very important that your resume is readable to a computer. So graphics are not readable, pictures, different things like that, a computer cannot read. So if you send that to an ATS, you've basically just screened yourself out. They often have a recruiter reading the resumes as well as a human going through them. And it is usually a recruiter then and not the hiring manager in large corporations. And they're all looking to match the job requirements with the skills and experience. Whoever is doing the screening, whether it's an automatic service or the recruiter or a human, a hiring manager, they're looking for the keywords and the skills and experience that match that job description that they posted. In the large organization, the recruiter may identify matches, and they either pass them on to the hiring manager, or they may make a decision themselves whether to continue with this resume or not. Small corporations, again, less organized. It's usually a human that will go through the resumes. It can be the hiring manager, or if they have a recruiter, they may not have recruiting or HR in a startup. And again, I recommend then the multiple touch points. How do you get your resume noticed? So I asked these questions of all of the different recruiters, small, large organizations, and everybody agreed about the following points. The connections within the company are really important. Employee referrals, if an employee refers your resume has just received, think of it of a few points higher because you've got like a warm recommendation. Also, if you're just somebody that can get your resume in front of the hiring manager, you may have skipped the recruiter level, or even in front of the recruiter, then they're not going to miss you in that screening process. A resume without a cover letter is a disadvantage. You should have a good cover letter that you're sending with your resume. It's a great opportunity to explain any kind of breaks, gaps in your process, highlight why you are the right candidate, showcase that you've internalized, understood the job description, and show how you meet the qualifications. If you're in a sales position, or show me that you can sell yourself. So it's a great advantage to put a good cover letter that shows you sales skills. Likewise, if it's a writing position, show us that you're a good writer. Good grammar, spelling mistakes speak a lot about a resume. They show how much effort you've put into the resume. They also show your attention to detail and your level of English. Correct dates are really important. You want your dates, one, to match your LinkedIn profile. Often recruiters and hiring managers will go on your LinkedIn profile and have a look and see, one, do things match? Do they know this? Do you know the same people? What recommendations people have said about you? Another thing is, you don't want to be in the situation where you start interviewing and you're asked about dates and suddenly things don't match. You don't look credible. You don't want your resume to be too busy. In the initial stage, your resume is screened for just a few seconds. If they're interested in you, they'll spend a little bit longer. But a 5-page resume is not something anybody wants to read or really has the time to read, where often less is more, also in showing us that you understand what is important and what is relevant, and not just dumping a whole lot of information. Where don't just describe your responsibilities, add quantifiable bullet points that are very results focused, and again, you're highlighting your added value. So the next step, your resume has made it through, is the initial phone screen. And in large corporations, it's usually a recruiter that will do the initial phone screen. They're often remote, so they may not know the actual people you'll be working with. And I'm mentioning that for you to think about the kind of questions that you're going to ask them, because they may not be able to tell you specifics about the team, etc. because they may have never met them. They will schedule a call with you at a specific time, and they usually have a set of predetermined questions that they've sat together with the hiring manager and they've worked out the questions that they want to ask. They usually have the liberty of going a little bit further, and if you mention something they want you to elaborate on, etc. But it's usually the same with different people, with the different candidates. In small corporations, this initial phone screen can be done by a recruiter or the hiring manager, and I've seen hiring managers that just pick up the phone and just call you. And this is where I think it's very important that you also take control of the process. If they called you at a bad time or you're not prepared, you don't have to say, oh, I'm not prepared or something like that, but you can say, look, I'm very interested in the position, but I'm just walking into a meeting, or I can't talk right now. Can we please schedule a time to talk? You're much better off having the call when your kids are not screaming in the background and when you're ready and prepared. And again, in small organizations, they may have predetermined questions, but it's usually less scripted. And some of them may just sort of get on and just have a chat with you. So what questions are you usually asked in the phone screen? Be ready to answer why you're looking for a job, and that would also mean like what reasons you have for leaving for this position now, if you are currently working, and previous positions in the past. Why the role, why this company. They also want you to confirm basic facts like dates when you worked, and again, the accuracy is very important. You don't want to get yourself in a situation where suddenly you need to, oh, I'm sorry, that's not the actual date. You should have your resume in front of you. It's also great if you can remember certain things so you don't need to check every little thing that they're asking you. They'll want to find out about your work authorization status and likely ask you about different degrees, skills, etc. They'll ask you behavioral-based interview questions to understand your skills, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment as well. And they will inquire about your compensation expectations. So it's not legal to ask what you're currently making or what you made in the past, but it is to ask about your compensation expectations. So be ready to answer that question. And I recommend that you give some sort of a range where the higher part of the end of your range is really what you'd love to get and will be, you know, really ecstatic. Don't go crazy and say, okay, $1 million, what you'd love, but be realistic. So give some sort of a range and get ready to answer that questions. Now, really important here, don't underestimate the initial phone screen, meaning prepare for this screen like you would to an interview. You don't get through this stage, you're not going to have that face-to-face interview. I also have seen people that are just not sure about, it's a recruiter, you know, underestimating them. They're often the ones making the decision on whether you're going to move to the next step. Sometimes they just summarize the interview and they send the summary to the hiring manager, but again, their impressions are going to count. And sometimes they're just the ones who are going to decide, nope, you're not moving to the next step. So take this stage very seriously. I recommend that you read about the 14 tips to acing the phone interview. That's one of the blogs on I'm Back at Work. Next steps in the interviews is usually a combination of all the below. So there'll be sometimes follow-up phone interviews, where the phone interviews can be technical interviews. These can also be face-to-face. There's often video interviews as well, especially if you're remote. Face-to-face interviews, some of them are one-on-one. Often they're also a panel. So be ready to speak in front of a group of people. The behavioral interview questions, and I highly recommend you read the behavioral interview, what it is and how to prepare and ace the questions. is basically the assumption here is instead of giving you theoretical situations and asking you how would you deal if you had this and that, is asking you about your behavior in the past with the assumption that your behavior in the past predicts how you will behave in the future. And you should look at the job description again and what they're looking for, and that can help you understand and think about what kind of questions they will likely ask you, and prepare great stories on what it is that you're bringing to the table around the skills that they're looking for and your past behaviors. Just create little stories about what you've done and how it worked. They will also look at how you match the job requirements and the skills and experience. Often than not today, there is some sort of a test or assignment. Some of them, I've even seen it as the next stage after the initial phone interview. The next thing is you have to do a presentation over the phone or in face-to-face, if it's for a sales interview, selling the product. If it's often people have a technical test if it's for a software engineer. Sometimes for marketing, you will need to write some sort of marketing materials, etc. And that's become more and more of the norm across both small and large organizations. They will also be looking at cultural fit, and this is where I also highly recommend for you to look around and assess if it's a good cultural fit for you. And there's a great blog on that too at the I'm Back at Work website for you to really look for different cues to try and learn and understand if it's a good fit for you. So large organizations, the process is usually a lot more organized, where there will be the same steps in each for each interviewee. And when you're on the phone for the phone screening, it's a great opportunity to ask then, what is the interview process? What are next steps? And that will tell you about what to expect, and also about how process oriented the organization is or not, especially for small corporations. It will tell you a little bit more about the culture as well. So in the large corporations, you'll usually interview with the hiring manager, often with the teammates, and have some sort of a conversation with HR. And again, their questions are more pre-assigned, and sometimes what they do is that people will ask you the same questions over and over to see if you're consistent, or they may divide different questions that are looking at different skill sets and have, let's say, one interviewer or one group asking those questions and another one asking different ones. Where it's very helpful here if you find other people who have interviewed in those companies to ask, what did they ask you? What was the process? So you can learn more. Small corporations, again, not as much process in place. The interview is often with the hiring manager, with the teammates, and often with the person above the hiring manager, which would be the VP, and often the CEO. HR is only when they have HR. The CEO, this is something that's very important because the higher levels will want to see your passion, not about just the role, but about the company and the company's mission. So if you're a software engineer, you want to show them your skills, but you also want to show them why you're interested in their field, in their industry. But this will also show you in a small organization, if you do meet with the higher levels and the CEO, you will likely have more interaction with them going further down the line. And that is something for you to consider in what are you looking for? Are you looking to work in a small organization where you will likely interact with other teams, with higher management, or a larger corporation where that interaction is very different? How do you ace the interview? So again, I talked with a whole lot of different recruiters, hiring manager, and really the secret there is very simple: prepare. Do your research about the company, do your research about the role, Really study the job description so that when you're going in and talking about your experience, your achievements, it is relevant. Prepare your answers to the behavioral interview questions so you can really highlight what is relevant, and demonstrate a growth mindset. So what that means is talk about how you grew, whether it is in your responsibilities, how you learned new things, how you dealt with failure. And this is really important because especially if you don't meet all the qualifications now for the role, by demonstrating previously how you grew and how you learned new things, you can give them comfort that you can do this again. And it's really also demonstrating just a positive attitude as well. Very important to prepare a list of questions to ask. I can tell you from my own experience as well, I've had some interviews where there was a flip once the person started asking questions, where I could really see the depth of their understanding of their research as well. Because if you just ask me anything that is written on the website, then it's clear that you haven't even bothered to look. But if I can see that you read, you understood what we do, and sort of put a little forward thinking into it, you really can stand out. And there's a great blog on the I'm Back at Work website on the 18 do's and don'ts for interview questions. Offer to closing. So this last part really is sort of what happens. Okay, you passed the interviews, you did great, they like you. What's the general process? So it's not necessarily in this order, but usually there is a verbal offer before the written offer. So somebody will give you a call, you'll discuss the compensation and the more of the role, everything else. Then there's negotiation at one point, reference check. Sometimes the reference check is before the verbal offer, where they'll say to you, we're getting close to an offer, we'd like to speak with your references. Make sure to provide managers and colleagues. Companies always want to speak with at least a couple of your previous managers. Larger organizations just about always perform a background check. Smaller organizations don't necessarily do so. It is quite expensive, especially if you've lived in more than one place. So small organizations don't often do that. And then in the last stage, you get your written offer. So again, what's the difference here in the large corporations versus the small? Large corporations, before making you deciding who to make an offer to, may consider affirmative action. So that means if they have two candidates and they have the same skill set, but one is a minority or a woman, and in those roles or that geography, they're missing some people with those qualities, they will make the offer to the person who will meet with the affirmative action. So if you are a minority or a woman, I highly recommend that if there is a checkbox or something like that to mark, that you do. The employment team develops an offer. Again, it's more of a process, and they'll go back and they'll look at the pay band and the level and make sure that your compensation is within that level. I also want you to consider that if you come in and you're at the highest point of that band, let's say the band was again $80,000 to $120,000. If you get the $120,000, it's going to be quite hard for you to get a raise. You would only get a raise when you are bumped up to the next level. So take that into consideration. Just if you're thinking, okay, I'm getting 120 now, I'll get a raise soon. Well, maybe you need to have a conversation first about what it is you'd need to move up to the next pay band or next level. So in the large organizations, your negotiation room is really within the band. Beyond that is very unlikely. Depending on the organization, you may get options. If it's a very large corporation, you know, the number, depending on the position, may be lower. And usually the benefits pack is quite comprehensive. Small corporations, this is again coming back to, are they strapped for money? Are they not? And if they're not, you may have some more wiggle room because they are not constrained by the pay and band levels. In a startup, usually you would get options, and the benefits is something that you should look into a little bit more, because sometimes they don't match the 401k, or what is the percentage that you need to pay for healthcare, ask about paid time off, etc. So in closing the deal, one thing that I've heard from many hiring managers and recruiters, that at this point, if they gave you a verbal offer, they want you, okay? They don't want to go backwards and start looking for somebody else. So if you ask for another $5,000, depending, of course, on how high the initial offer was, you're more often than not, they will give it to you. But I want you to think about something else here. You're going into basically think of this as a relationship as well. So you don't want to be seen like the greedy one. So keep in mind there is that option unless you're at the top of that compensation band or level. And this is where if you look closely into the benefits, it may open the door for you to come back and to say something, I see you don't match the 401k. It was matched for me in previous companies. Is there any way that we could up the compensation then by $5,000, or the paid time off is less, something like that? If you provide a good reason, there may be something to talk about. So hopefully at this point, you're hired, and good luck in your new job. And while you type in your questions, I see we have some. I also want to make sure to invite you to join I'm Back at Work's Facebook group. It's a free women's only Facebook group where we support each other throughout the job search process and also throughout our career. And you can find daily tips for success. You can hear about open positions from companies that have reached out to me that are looking to hire women, whether it's transitioning women or women open to hiring the women in general. And we have a few questions. So Annie's asking, do you have to answer the initial compensation question? I have no idea about salaries. I'm new to the country. I have no contacts in my industry here. It has been 5 years since I worked. I'm in a specialist area as plastics engineer. So Annie, I suggest you do some research, go on Glassdoor, try and talk to people who are in the field so that they can give you some of that information. You may come back and say, look, I really don't know, but I want you to be aware that sometimes a recruiter may not pass you forward if you don't give them some number. And they often than not do not mention what their range is. In a large organization, you may sort of get something because they have that band, they may share it with you. The problem is, why do companies not like to share it? Because if we say 80 to 120, you'll want 120 without sort of taking into account that we're looking at the different qualifications, and what we had in mind as worth 120 may be different. So I really suggest you do more research so that you are able to provide something. And thank you for the comment. That is very useful presentation. And any other questions that I can answer for you today? Well, thank you for joining me today, and I hope you join future webinars as well. Thank you.